The acrid stench of smoke and charred metal filled Axelo's nostrils as she crept through the debris-strewn corridor of the crippled starship. Her heart pounded in her chest, each breath a labored gasp through the respirator of her battle suit. The once pristine halls of the Yarian battle cruiser now lay in ruins, a testament to the ferocity of the human attack. Axelo's mission was clear: sabotage the ship's core drive and prevent the humans from salvaging the vessel. The war between the Yarian Dominion and the Terran Alliance had raged for cycles, a bitter conflict born of misunderstanding and the unyielding pride of two races. But now, with the Dominion fleet shattered and their armies in retreat, every warrior knew the end was near. As she rounded a corner, her plasma rifle at the ready, Axelo froze. There, amid the twisted metal and flickering lights, stood a human soldier. His armor was scarred and dented, the Terran Alliance insignia emblazoned on his chest plate. Their eyes met, emerald green locking with deep blue, a moment of tense recognition passing between mortal enemies. In a flash, they both raised their weapons, fingers poised on the triggers, but something stayed Axelo's hand. Perhaps it was the weariness in the human's eyes, a mirror of her own exhaustion, or maybe it was the realization that in the grand scheme of the cosmos, they were both mere pawns in a war that had consumed countless lives. "I have no desire to kill you," Axelo said, her words translated by the suit's voxcaster, "but I will not hesitate to defend myself." The human regarded her wearily, his rifle unwavering. "That makes two of us," he replied, his voice tinged with the same fatigue that plagued her soul. "What's your name?" "Yar Axelo," she hesitated, surprised by the question. She saw no harm in the truth. "And yours, human?" "Sergeant Chris Rover, Terran Alliance Marines." He lowered his rifle slightly, a tentative gesture of truce. "I don't suppose you'd consider surrendering? It'd make both our lives a hell of a lot easier." Axelo snorted, a harsh sound through her respirator. "You know I cannot do that, Sergeant Rover. My duty compels me to complete my mission, even at the cost of my own life." Rover sighed, shaking his head. "Figured as much. Damn shame, really. In another life, we might have been friends." "In another life, perhaps," Axelo agreed, a strange pang of regret tugging at her heart. "But in this one, we are enemies, bound by the oaths we swore and the causes we serve." The human nodded, a flicker of understanding passing between them. "So be it then. Let's get this over with." As they prepared to engage in the dance of death, a sudden tremor rocked the ship, sending them both stumbling. Alarms blared, red lights flashing and warning that the vessel's structural integrity was failing, the damage from the battle finally taking its toll. Rover cursed, regaining his balance. "We need to get out of here now. This whole section's about to collapse." Axelo hesitated, torn between her duty and the instinct for survival. But as another shudder tore through the ship, she knew there was only one choice. "Lead the way, human. A temporary truce, until we escape this death trap." With a curt nod, Rover turned and sprinted down the corridor, Axelo close on his heels. Together, they raced through the disintegrating starship, dodging falling debris and leaping over gaping chasms. It was a mad dash for survival, two enemies united by the primal need to live. As they reached the hangar bay, Axelo's heart sank. The only remaining shuttle was a battered Terran craft, its hull scorched and pitted. Rover paused at the airlock, glancing back at her. "Looks like we're stuck with each other a little longer," he said, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "Think you can handle being in close quarters with a human?" Axelo met his gaze, a flicker of amusement in her own eyes. "I suppose I'll have to manage, Sergeant Rover. After all, it seems fate has a twisted sense of humor." With that, they boarded the shuttle, two unlikely allies bound together by the threads of destiny. As the craft tore free from the dying starship, Axelo couldn't help but wonder what the future held for a Yarian warrior and a human soldier, thrown together by the capricious whims of the universe. Little did she know their journey was only just beginning, a tale of love, redemption, and the indomitable spirit of two souls who dared to defy the stars themselves. The shuttle shuddered and groaned as it hurtled through the void, the battle-scarred craft barely holding together. In the cramped confines of the cockpit, Axelo and Rover worked in tense silence, their hands flying over the controls as they fought to keep the vessel on course. "Damn it," Rover muttered, his brow furrowed in concentration. "The NAV systems are fried. We're flying blind." Axelo glanced at the flickering displays, her own frustration mounting. "Can you get us to the nearest habitable planet? We need to set down for repairs." The human shook his head, his jaw clenched. "Not without a functioning NAV computer. We could be light years from the nearest system, for all we know." A tense silence descended upon the cockpit, broken only by the persistent whine of the overworked engines. Axelo leaned back in her seat, her mind racing. She was a warrior, trained in the art of combat and subterfuge, not a starship mechanic. But if they didn't find a way to fix the shuttle, they'd be doomed to drift through the void until their supplies ran out. Rover seemed to sense her unease, his blue eyes flickering to her face. "Hey," he said softly, his voice barely audible over the drone of the engines. "We'll figure this out. We didn't survive that storm back there just to die out here in the black." Axelo met his gaze, surprised by the warmth in his tone. "You seem awfully confident, human. What makes you so sure we'll make it out of this mess?" He shrugged, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "Call it a hunch, or maybe just good old-fashioned human stubbornness. We're a tough bunch, in case you hadn't noticed." Despite herself, Axelo felt a flicker of amusement. "I've seen your kind in battle, Sergeant Rover." "Tough is an understatement." Rover chuckled, the sound startling in the tense confines of the cockpit. "Damn straight, and call me Chris. If we're going to be stuck together, might as well drop the formalities." Axelo hesitated, the idea of familiarity with a human still foreign to her. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw a glimmer of something that made her heart skip a beat. It was understanding, a recognition of the bond they'd forged in the heat of battle. "Very well, Chris," she said, the name strange on her tongue. "But don't expect me to go easy on you just because we're on a first-name basis." He grinned, the expression transforming his battle-hardened features. "Wouldn't dream of it, Axelo. Now, let's see if we can't get this bucket of bolts back on track." Together, they turned their attention to the shuttle systems, their earlier animosity giving way to a tentative camaraderie. They worked in tandem, Axelo's nimble fingers dancing over the control panels, as Rover called out instructions from the pilot's seat. Hours turned into days as they fought to keep the shuttle operational, rationing their meager supplies and catching what little sleep they could in shifts. The close quarters and shared struggle forged a bond between them, a connection that transcended the barriers of species and allegiance. And somewhere along the way, amidst the endless expanse of stars and in the desperate fight for survival, Axelo began to see Chris in a new light. His strength, his determination, his unwavering spirit in the face of adversity, all of it called to something deep within her, a yearning she'd never known she possessed. As they worked side by side, their bodies brushing in the cramped confines of the shuttle, Axelo couldn't help but wonder if this was what the humans called fate, two souls thrown together by the chaos of war, finding solace, and perhaps even love, in the depths of space. But even as her heart raced at the thought, Axelo knew their journey was far from over. The void was vast and unforgiving, and the ghosts of their past still haunted them both. If they were to survive, they would need to confront the demons that lurked within and forge a future together against all odds. Days turned into weeks as the shuttle drifted through the void, its occupants locked in a battle against time. In the unforgiving expanse of space, Axelo and Chris fell into a routine, their initial wariness giving way to a tentative trust, born of necessity and shared hardship. In the long hours between repairs and ration meals, they began to talk, their conversations drifting from the mundane to the deeply personal. Chris spoke of his life on Earth, of the family he'd left behind to join the Terran Alliance. "I grew up on a farm, you know," he said one day, his eyes distant with memory. "My parents, they were simple folks, Dad worked the land, and Mom, she kept the house running. It was a good life. Peaceful. He paused, a wistful smile tugging at his lips. I remember the summers, running through the fields with my brother, chasing each other until we collapsed in the tall grass, laughing until our sides hurt. And the nights, God, the nights were something else. We'd lie on our backs, staring up at the stars, dreaming of all the places we'd go, the adventures we'd have. Axelo listened, entranced by the picture he painted, a world so different from her own. It sounds beautiful, she murmured, her voice soft with wonder. I can almost see it, the green fields, the blue skies. Chris nodded, his eyes meeting hers. It was, but I always knew I wanted more. I wanted to make a difference, to fight for something bigger than myself. That's why I joined the Alliance, to protect that beauty, that peace. In turn, she found herself opening up to him, sharing stories of her own upbringing on Yeria Prime. She spoke of the rigid caste system that had shaped her life, of the expectations placed upon her as a warrior of the Dominion. From the moment I was born, my path was set, she said, her voice tinged with bitterness. I was to be a warrior, a defender of the Dominion. There was no choice, no room for dreams or desires. She paused, her gaze distant. I remember the training, the endless drills, the constant pressure to be the best. We were taught to be hard, unyielding, to put the needs of the Dominion above all else. And I did, without question, because I knew nothing else. Chris reached out, his hand finding hers, a silent gesture of support. That's no way to live, he said softly, his eyes filled with understanding. You deserve more than that, Axelo. You deserve to choose your own path, to find your own happiness. She looked at him, surprised by the intensity of his gaze. I'm not sure I know how, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. All I've ever known is duty, service. I'm not sure I'm capable of anything else. But even as the words left her lips, Axelo knew they weren't true. Being here with Chris, talking and laughing and dreaming, she had begun to feel a glimmer of something new, something she had never dared to hope for. And as they talked, Axelo began to realize just how much of her life had been dictated by duty and tradition, how little room there had been for her own desires. But even as they grew closer, the ghosts of their past still haunted them. Chris was plagued by nightmares, visions of the battles he'd fought, and the comrades he'd lost. She would wake to find him thrashing in his sleep, his face contorted in anguish. No, no, please, he would mutter, his voice desperate and broken.
I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry. Axelo would reach out her hand, finding his in the darkness, her voice soft and soothing. Shoo, it's okay, she would murmur, her fingers stroking his sweat-dampened hair. You're safe, Chris. I'm here. Slowly, he would calm, his breathing evening out as he clung to her, his face buried in the crook of her neck. And in those moments, Axelo would feel a fierce protectiveness wash over her, a desire to shield him from the horrors that haunted his dreams. Axelo, too, was tormented by memories of the war, of the lives she'd taken in the name of the Dominion. She would see their faces in her mind's eye, the terror and the pain, the accusation in their eyes as she cut them down. And always, the question that haunted her, was it worth it? Was the cause she had fought for so blindly truly just? In the quiet moments, when the weight of her actions threatened to crush her, Axelo would turn to Chris, her voice raw with emotion. I don't know if I can ever atone for what I've done, she would whisper, her eyes filled with tears. The blood on my hands, the lives I've taken, how do I come back from that? And always, Chris would be there, his arms around her, his voice soft and reassuring. You're not alone, Axelo, he would murmur, his lips brushing her forehead. We've both done things we regret, things we wish we could take back. But we can't change the past. All we can do is try to be better, to make amends in whatever way we can. And in those moments, Axelo would feel a glimmer of hope, a sense that perhaps, with Chris by her side, she could find a way to make peace with her past and build a new future, one free from the chains of duty and regret. One night, as they sat huddled together in the dimly lit cockpit, Chris turned to her, his eyes haunted. "Do you ever wonder if it was all worth it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "All the fighting, the killing, the sacrifices we made." Axelo was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the stars beyond the viewport. "I don't know," she admitted at last, her voice heavy with emotion. "I was trained to believe in the Dominion's cause, to fight and die for our people. But now out here with you, I'm not so sure anymore." Chris reached out his hand, finding hers in the darkness. "I know what you mean," he said softly, his fingers intertwining with hers. "I joined the Alliance because I believed in what we were fighting for. But the longer this war dragged on, the more I started to question everything." They sat in silence for a long while, their hands clasped together, drawing strength from each other's presence. And in that moment, Axelo knew that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. As the days stretched into weeks, they continued to work on the shuttle, their efforts fueled by a growing desperation. The vessel systems were failing one by one, and their supplies were running dangerously low. But even in the face of overwhelming odds, they refused to give up. One day, as Axelo was working on the NAV computer, Chris let out a whoop of joy from the pilot's seat. "Axelo, get up here," he called, his voice filled with excitement. "I think I've got something." She hurried to his side, her heart pounding in her chest. There, on the flickering display, was a single blinking light, a beacon of hope in the vast emptiness of space. "It's a distress signal," Chris explained, his eyes shining with relief. "And it's coming from a nearby system. If we can just hold out a little longer, we might be able to make it there." Axelo felt a surge of emotion, a mix of hope and fear, and something else she couldn't quite name. She looked at Chris, saw the determination in his eyes, and knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. "Then let's get to work," she said, a smile tugging at her lips. "We've got a future to fight for." The shuttle shuddered and groaned as it entered the atmosphere of the unknown planet, its battered hull glowing red-hot from the friction. In the cockpit, Axelo and Chris gripped the controls, their knuckles white with tension as they fought to keep the vessel on course. "Hold on," Chris shouted over the roar of the engines. "This is going to be a rough landing." Axelo gritted her teeth, her eyes fixed on the rapidly approaching surface. The planet was a swirl of green and blue, its lush forests and sparkling oceans a welcome sight after the endless expanse of space. But even as relief flooded through her, she knew that their journey was far from over. With a final, shuddering jolt, the shuttle touched down on a grassy plain, its landing gear sinking into the soft earth. For a long moment, Axelo and Chris sat in stunned silence, their hearts pounding in their chests as they struggled to catch their breath. "We made it," Chris said at last, a grin spreading across his face. "I can't believe we actually made it." Axelo couldn't help but smile in return, the tension draining from her body as the reality of their situation sank in. They were alive and they were together, on a world far from the war and the chaos that had brought them to this point. As they emerged from the shuttle, blinking in the bright sunlight, Axelo felt a sense of awe wash over her. The planet was unlike anything she had ever seen, its beauty and serenity a stark contrast to the harsh, militaristic world she had known on Yaria Prime. Chris, too, seemed transfixed by their surroundings, his eyes wide with wonder as he took in the lush greenery and the distant mountains. "It's like something out of a dream," he murmured, his voice filled with reverence. In the days that followed, they set about exploring their new home, marveling at the strange and wondrous creatures that inhabited its forests and streams. They found shelter in a cave near a bubbling spring, its crystal-clear waters a welcome respite from the heat of the sun. And as they worked together to build a life on this alien world, Axelo and Chris found themselves growing ever closer, their bond deepening with each passing day. In the quiet moments between the struggles for survival, they talked and laughed and loved, their hearts intertwined in a way that transcended the boundaries of species and culture. One night, As they lay together beneath a canopy of stars, Chris turned to Axelo, his eyes shining with emotion. "I never thought I could feel this way," he whispered, his fingers tracing the delicate contours of her face. "Not after everything I've seen and done. But with you, Axelo, I feel like I've found a piece of myself I never knew was missing." Axelo felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, a swell of love and gratitude rising in her chest. "I feel the same way," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "You've shown me that there's more to life than duty and war, that there's hope and beauty and love, even in the darkest of times." As they held each other close, their bodies intertwined beneath the starry sky, Axelo knew that they had found something rare and precious, a love that could overcome any obstacle and weather any storm. And though the future was uncertain, and the ghosts of their past still lingered, she knew that together, they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. For in the end, it was the strength of their bond, the unbreakable connection between two souls, that would guide them through the darkness and into the light. And as she looked into Chris's eyes, she saw a reflection of that spirit, a glimmer of the hope and the promise that lay ahead. Together, they had defied the odds and forged a new beginning, a testament to the power of love and the resilience of the human heart.